Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here. It's so much fun to be able to finally have these physical meetings. And I hope that the people that are watching online as well will find this interesting. So my name is Salla Franzén. I'm quite new at IKEA. So my title is that I'm the Data and Analytics Director for Pricing. And when I was thinking about what to talk about, I actually decided to talk about something that just sort of is my own thinking. And you'll see that it's not at all my own thinking. I've just sort of been inspired by a lot of smart people, and then I tried to sort of make it work in my brain. Yeah, let's see. Yes, so this is kind of what I'm going to talk about today. For me, I really like the way that we're doing AI ethics in the European Union, where we have this high-level expert group that I guess most people have heard about, and they kind of really connected practitioners with researchers and started to think about what is AI ethics? What is it that's important for us to have a sustainable and good journey into it really using the power of AI? And I'm quite proud of the way that we're doing that in the European Union. So instead of sort of doing whatever we want to do and then sort of trying to catch up, we're actually trying to do something where it might take a little bit more time, but we're probably not going to become evil, at least. And that's very important for me as a human. I want AI to be something that really benefits humanity. So I'll give a short run-through of the principles of the high-level expert group, and if you've heard them before, congratulations. And after that, I'm going to talk about something called the glass box approach, which is a concept that was founded by Virginia Dignam, who's a professor in AI ethics at Umeå University, together with her peers. And I find it sort of a nice concept to have in mind when we sort of start to talk about how to really implement ethical aspects into the AI that we work with, and then I'll have a short example at the end. So, unboxing AI ethics principles. I just have to say the best part about working at IKEA is that I get to use this kind of pictures. Aren't they so cool? It's like, yay! Sorry. Yes. So the first one is human agency and oversight. And I mean, for me, when I started to look at the principles, I thought it's common sense. And that's very true. But for me, it's common sense, but articulated in a way that sort of makes it easier to talk about. So one of the reasons why I've started to talk a lot about AI ethics is that it annoys me when people who are not practitioners start to fearmonger. And I really want us to be scientific when we talk about AI ethics. So human agency and oversight, when it comes to sort of the practical implications, it's sort of seeing to it that whatever algorithm we implement, there's always a human that you can talk to. So if you get a really weird experience, you feel that it's sort of really sort of not in your comfort zone, there needs to be a human that you can go and talk to and say, I don't like this, or why is this the answer for my question? And you should be expect to get a reasonable answer. Technical robustness and safety. I think for anyone who's been working with software, this is kind of a standard. But since a lot of the methods that we're using and that are being sort of built are so new, sometimes this might be something that we actually need to keep in mind a little bit more than we might need to when we're sort of building normal software, because the standards aren't quite there yet. Privacy, data governance, super important. It's a little bit like, I think about my grandfather, my grandfather's father. He was a bank director. He started a very small bank in Evermark in Österbotten in Finland. And it was just for the farming community in that town where he grew up. So like 20 families were his clients. And he, of course, knew everything about them, but he didn't sort of gossip about them to each other because he was a bank, so he did the bank secrecy. And for me, the sort of data governance and privacy is exactly that. Even if we know things, we shouldn't share it unless people want us to share it. Transparency, super cool concept. Being able to really know when there is an AI system that's kind of impacting your life. And right now we're kind of, we have this small working group where we're talking about sort of how can we make management level aware of the possibilities with AI. And one of the things is exactly sort of being able to explain what it is we're trying to do, being able to explain how we're trying to do it. And it's actually a pedagogical sort of conundrum, because so I'm a mathematician, and when I tell people that I'm a mathematician, usually they say either I hated math when I was a kid, or they say I loved math, but I did something else because I thought it was more important. So there's always like there's a an emotional reaction to science, which I think is pretty fascinating. And when we're starting to talk about transparency, we somehow need to make it less scary. And for me, transparency is a key to make it less scary for the people. If we're able to explain in a pedagogical way what we've done and why, then hopefully that will sort of create curiosity instead of fear. Diversity, non-discrimination, and fairness. So the example that I have at the end will touch on this, because this is probably one of the most important things that we need to do, because this is the part that can kind of ensure that we're actually making the world better, not worse. And it's from like a mathematical, theoretical viewpoint, everybody who works with data science knows that this is super important and very, very difficult. Because how do you avoid unfair bias? Then you need to kind of go back to having hard-coded programs, maybe. Maybe you need to create completely new data and sort of somehow create humans that don't really exist, because that's what you're kind of doing. Let me elaborate. So as a human, I do a lot of stuff on the internet. And as I do things, as I sort of walk around with my phone, as I don't know, chat with people, I'm creating my kind of digital twin. So me as a human also exists as a copy, but in digital format. And for me, that's super like cool. And I think about that a lot. That if we were to choose the way that we kind of tweak the data so that we're avoiding unfair bias by improving the data, then we're kind of creating humans that don't exist. And how do we then see to it that the results of the models are still relevant for these humans that we hope will exist? Or, yeah, I don't know, I get confused, but it's super fun to think about. And as I said, I'll come back to a much more concrete example at the end. Societal and environmental well-being. I think, sorry, it's like a, sorry. Yeah. This is very much sort of connected to the bias thing as well, but there's also something about the energy that we use when we build AI systems. I mean, Bitcoin is like a nightmare when it comes to energy consumption, and I'm kind of a bit passionate that we shouldn't do the same thing when it comes to AI. There's this example of a song that like people have listened to billions of times, I think, on YouTube. Probably not billions, but I'm good at exaggeration. And that energy consumption, just from watching that video so many times, is the equivalent of like 30,000 cars, the whole life cycle of them in the US. That's the energy consumption that we've used just to watch this music video. and that can be cool, but maybe that's not what we want to do. Yes, and then of course understanding the societal impact that your AI will have. The way that Google search engine works today, that kind of a little bit forms what things we're looking at, what things we find on the internet. And being aware of that, I think, is super important for any corporation that's building anything. Accountability. So before I joined IKEA a month and a half ago, I was working for a bank. So this is a very sort of common concept for me and very comfortable concept for me since banks are super secure. But this is also something that is really important, I think, if you're a smaller company, maybe sort of ideating and building something really cool, please remember that you need to see to it that you also have clear accountability for what you're doing. So I come to the glass box approach. So as I said, this is a concept that has been created by researchers, so Virginia Dignam and her team, and you have the link at the bottom there. So what she talks about is really how to see to it that you implement things in a glass box. So people have always talked about the black box, and that's something scary. But the glass box kind of conceptually means that you're actually able to see what's going on inside the model. So what does that mean? So I like the kind of way that she splits it into two parts, but they're very interconnected. So for me, when we start to talk about how to build ethical AI, it's very much about what values we have. So as a society, what's important for us? What is it that we want to achieve, and what is it that we don't want to do? And if you work for a larger organization, your company probably has values written down, like these are the values that drive us. And those, like when I was a junior, I thought that was silly because that's just words, but it actually is super important because that's one of the parts that should define how you work. So for instance, yeah, I'll come to the example later. Sorry, I'm so excited to talk about it. Yeah, so our values as humans, our values as a society will vary. There's this moral machine from MIT. I don't know if you've read about it or seen it, but it's like a gamification of ethics in some sense. So you have two different scenarios. You have one scenario, and then you have to choose whether you're going to let the people in the car or the people on the road survive. So it's like you have a road, and there's a car coming, and then there's like a scenario where the people in the car will die, and there's a scenario where the people on the road will die. And the cool thing is that they made a game out of it because they wanted to get a lot of answers. And since it's a game, you have to kind of take it with a pinch of salt, as we say in Swedish. But the most important thing for me was when you look at the differences between regions, because this starts to say something about the cultural aspect of ethics, the cultural aspect of what norms are important. And you can kind of see how very different it is in different parts of the world. So if we're building autonomous cars, for instance, then we need to be aware that like we might inadvertently be like introducing another culture into our culture, for instance, or we might want to use that consciously. So sort of setting up what values do we want to stand for? Are there things that we never want to do? And then understanding how our norms connect to the values, and then being able to actually set requirements on the models that we build. So we want to be fair, but what does fair mean? We want to be unbiased, but what does that mean in this specific case? And that means that, so the kind of right-hand side box, that's the traditional machine learning system. I have simplified it, yes. So that's kind of the traditional machine learning model, but then you have this extra sort of, for me it's kind of, you have this extra thought process that's super important and needs to be integrated into when you're building your models. And this thought process should also sort of be implemented into the model operations. So I'll take an example now because I feel like I'm just, yes, very corporate, but these are my own thoughts. So the glass box approach, I'm going to take an example from my previous organization. And the important thing when it comes to AI ethics is to realize that it's very seldom the fact that there's a right and a wrong answer. So in this example, it's, well, I guess it could work for anything, but I started to think about this when we were talking about how we price mortgages. So say that you wanted to build an end-to-end machine learning model for mortgages. Well, you definitely want to be able to have the client call a human if they're not happy with the mortgage rate that you're suggesting, because otherwise you're going to get a problem, because you want to be there for your client. Another thing that really sort of I think is important is the fairness part. We want to be fair, but what does that mean? So if we think with just our heart, maybe we want to give the best rate to those that are struggling the most. But that will also increase the risk that the company is taking, because the probability that someone who has very little income and has a very high mortgage, that they're going to be able to pay back the mortgage is quite low. And is it actually fair? Because they might be sort of starting to struggle much more financially than they were. The second one is that we could sort of just give the same rate to everyone. That's fair because then everybody gets treated equally. But then the people that sort of, the people that are struggling, maybe they won't be able to take the mortgage. And maybe we're shutting out parts of society because we're giving the same mortgage rate to everyone. Or maybe we should give the best mortgage rate to those that are the most wealthy, because they're going to be able to pay back, and that'll be great for us as a bank. But then we're completely excluding large parts of society. Or being unfair to large parts of society, sorry. Yes. Or maybe we want to be sort of digital first. If you get your mortgage on the digital app, then we'll give you the best rate. But then we're also excluding parts of society because not everybody is digital. We tend to forget about that, or I do. But not everybody has a smartphone. Not everybody wants to have a smartphone. Not everybody wants to have to connect to the internet to do things. Some people actually still sort of, in decreasing amounts, but still believe in the human contact. And if we only have the best rates in a digital interface, that's not fair towards everyone. Yeah. So this is kind of how I think about the glass box when it comes to the fairness aspect. And I kind of like the sort of separation and how it then feeds into the modeling that you do. So thinking about what problem are we trying to solve, what potential pitfalls do we have, and how can we really sort of translate what we're trying to solve and what pitfalls we're trying to avoid into the model monitoring and the tracking and the follow-up to see to it that we're building what we intended. And I'm sorry this is in Swedish, but I really like this one. So as I said, I just started at IKEA, so this is stealing with pride in some sense still. But this is a letter that Ingvar Kamprad and Allan Kronwall sent to the staff. And it just says that, yeah, this is not going to work in English. So in Swedish, you can say you, and it's one person, or you can say you, and it's several. And there was this revolution in Sweden where people started to say the one person you. So it's du in Swedish. In Finlandssvenska, it's du. Yeah, and instead of enforcing that for everyone, they wrote a letter saying that we, in this brochure, we've chosen to use the singular you because we think it's a nice thing. But if you don't feel like it, you don't have to. And I really like that. I think it's pretty cool. It's like, yeah, we really think it's cool with digital stuff, but if you don't like it, that's also fine. And for me, that's kind of a very ethical approach to things. Yeah. So to summarize, I think when it comes to AI ethics, the most important thing is to decide what you want to do, but also what you don't want to do. Thank you.